Every crime hides a story. Every story waits to be uncovered. Welcome to Truth Unraveled. Right now, as I speak, a woman sits in a cell in Texas. A narrow 6-by-9-foot room where time crawls slowly toward her fate. The O'Daniel Unit in Gatesville feels unnervingly quiet at night, disturbed only by the low drone of air conditioning and the distant shuffle of correctional officers making rounds. Inside this maximum security building, Taylor Rene Parker lies on her steel cot, staring at the familiar concrete ceiling that has loomed over her for more than 2 years. Psychologists who study prison life often say that death row inmates go through emotional stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventual acceptance. Observers who've met Parker describe a woman shifting back and forth between these states. At times, she insists she's innocent when speaking with her lawyers. On other days, the crushing weight of what she's done and what awaits her suffocates her spirit. But what actually unfolds in those last 24 hours before execution? Few people have seen the process beyond a headline. Tonight, we'll walk through what Taylor Parker's final day on Earth will look like when that day arrives. To understand why Parker sits where she is today, we need to revisit the horrific crime that sealed her fate. On October 9, 2020, in the quiet town of New Boston, Texas, a young mother named Reagan Simmons Hancock was brutally attacked inside her home. Reagan was 34 weeks pregnant and preparing joyfully for her daughter's arrival. But that morning, a trusted friend showed up at her door, carrying a hammer and scalpel. The assault was savage. Reagan was bludgeoned repeatedly in the head, the force so extreme it drove her skull inward. Yet she was still alive when Parker began slicing into her abdomen from hip to hip. In an unimaginable fight for survival, Reagan tried desperately to save both her life and her unborn babies. Her 3-year-old child was somewhere in the house during the attack. Even as Parker cut into her, Reagan resisted until her body could fight no longer. This was no sudden outburst of rage. It was a carefully plotted plan. For months, Taylor Parker had woven a web of lies, pretending to be pregnant. She convinced her boyfriend of the deception, staging everything from fake ultrasounds to an elaborate gender reveal party with family and friends. All the while, she cultivated her friendship with Reagan, even photographing her wedding and engagement. The morning of the murder, investigators later learned, Parker had been researching videos about caring for premature babies delivered at 35 weeks. She showed up at Reagan's home prepared, hammer and scalpel in hand, determined to cut the baby from her friend's womb. Reagan Simmons Hancock was only 21 years old. She was a wife, a loving mother to a 3-year-old girl, and a young woman who had her whole future ahead of her. She trusted Parker, never imagining that the friend who took her wedding photos would betray her in the cruelest way possible. Her unborn daughter, Braxlyn Sage Hancock, was 34 weeks along, viable outside the womb. Medical experts testified later that the infant had a heartbeat when born, but never survived, as Parker lacked the ability or intention to provide care. The tragedy robbed Reagan's husband of his partner, her child of her mother, and an entire community of a woman known for her kindness. When Parker finally stood trial in September 2022, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Over the course of 3 weeks, 142 witnesses testified, detailing Parker's lies and the brutality of her crime. On October 3, 2022, the jury needed just 1 hour to convict her of capital murder. The same jury deliberated again on November 9th and returned with the ultimate sentence: death. Judge John Tidwell's words to her were stark. Take her to death row.
There's where most people don't realize how unusual Parker's sentence is. Since Texas reinstated the death penalty in 1976, the state has executed nearly 600 inmates, yet only 6 of them were women. The list is short but telling. Carla Faye Tucker, 1998. Betty Lou Beets, 2000. Frances Newton, 2005. Kimberly McCarthy, 2013. Suzanne Basso, 2014. Lisa Coleman, 2014. Since Coleman's execution more than a decade ago, Texas hasn't put another woman to death. Statistically, the odds suggest Parker may never face the needle, even with her death sentence. The appeals process in Texas is long, winding, and designed to scrutinize every detail. Parker has just entered the first stage, her automatic direct appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. This step only considers legal errors made during her trial. If that fails, she can ask the U.S. Supreme Court to review her case. Beyond that lies state habeas corpus proceedings, where she might raise new issues such as ineffective legal counsel or claims of prosecutorial misconduct. If unsuccessful, she can move into the federal system, starting with U.S. District Court, up through the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and potentially the Supreme Court again. This journey is not quick. Texas data shows the average time on death row before execution is over 11 years, but that figure undercounts those still waiting. In reality, inmates often spend 18 years or more in limbo. Some have waited over 3 decades. At only 29 when sentenced, Parker could easily remain behind bars into her 50s before the state ever sets an execution date, if they ever do. Her attorneys already plan to contest the conviction on multiple fronts. The use of graphic crime scene photos, jury selection concerns, prosecutorial comments during trial. They may also argue Parker's mental health history, including documented trauma, was mishandled by her defense team. Future changes in Supreme Court rulings around mental illness and capital punishment could also alter her fate.
Each morning at 6 a.m., Taylor Parker wakes to the same dull sight: the concrete ceiling of her 6 by 9 foot cell. Her world is small: a steel bed bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet and sink, and a narrow table where she sometimes writes. The red brick walls of the Unraveled Unit in Gatesville surround her, offering no comfort, only the cold sterility of a prison designed for those awaiting execution. Breakfast arrives through a slot in her door. Unlike the men on death row, who often receive bagged meals during lockdowns, the women at O'Daniel are provided with slightly better service. Some days, staffing allows for recreation: a small yard measuring about 50 by 10 yards, with a basketball hoop, a lone tree, and a bench. For about an hour, Parker might walk in circles or shoot baskets by herself before returning to isolation. Back inside, she can watch television mounted outside her cell door, though she has no control over the programming. Guards decide what plays, and inmates are left as passive viewers. While Parker's conditions are harsh, they differ from those of men held at the Pulaski Unit, where experts describe the environment as among the harshest in America. There, male death row prisoners are confined alone for 23 hours a day in tiny cells, with no work assignments, no contact with others, and only a small outdoor cage for recreation. Meals are cold and eaten alone. By comparison, women at O'Daniel have slightly more freedom. They can sometimes work 4-hour shifts, watch limited television with others in a shared area, and eat hot meals. Even so, Parker spends at least 22 hours a day alone, which takes a devastating toll on mental health. Psychologists note that long-term solitary confinement often leads to paranoia, depression, hallucinations, and breakdowns. The constant noise, doors slamming, inmates yelling, the unending clatter of prison life adds to the stress. Some inmates begin talking to themselves, gradually losing their grip on reality. Parker's interaction with the outside world is heavily restricted. She is allowed only 4 phone calls per year, each lasting 5 minutes and closely monitored by guards. Visits are limited to approved family members and attorneys, always through glass partitions. She can receive letters, but every piece of mail is screened for security risks. Religious services are permitted, and she has access to a small library with a modest selection of books. Still, the overarching theme is isolation. Perhaps the cruelest part of death row isn't the confinement itself, but the uncertainty. Each day, Parker wakes up not knowing whether her appeals will succeed, whether the courts will set an execution date, or whether she will spend decades in limbo. Experts call this death row syndrome, a constant cycle of hope and despair. Inmates live in hypervigilance, waiting for news that could either extend their lives or end them. Some days, Parker may feel a spark of hope about her legal battles. Other days, the weight of her situation crashes down like a wave. The unpredictability makes psychological recovery nearly impossible. Psychologists often compare the experience of death row to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. Denial. Prisoners insist they're innocent or that their appeals will surely succeed. Anger. Rage at lawyers, the justice system, or society as a whole. Bargaining. Desperate promises to God or attempts to negotiate for lighter sentences. Depression. The deep despair of realizing death is inevitable. Acceptance. A calm recognition of fate. But unlike the terminally ill, inmates don't know when their end will come. That uncertainty drags the process out endlessly. Many condemned prisoners maintain their innocence for years, clinging to denial. Parker's situation is different. She was caught red-handed, with the newborn baby in her possession. The deception she built was so detailed and documented that denial is difficult to sustain. Her crime was also deeply personal, the murder of a friend who trusted her. This betrayal carries a weight that makes guilt harder to escape. Unlike spur-of-the-moment killings, Parker spent months planning, which may accelerate her journey through these psychological stages. Parker does have access to psychiatric services, but treatment here comes with troubling questions. If doctors stabilize her mental health, they may be helping prepare her for execution. Restoring an inmate's competency, in effect, can make them fit to die. For Parker, therapy is both a lifeline and a paradox. While it may ease her suffering, it could also ensure she remains mentally sound enough to face the very punishment she fears. The torment doesn't stop at the prison gates. Reagan's family must relive their trauma over and over as Parker's appeals move through the courts. Experts say that death penalty cases often prolong grieving, preventing closure for victim families who endure decades of hearings and news coverage. At the same time, Parker's own family suffers. Her children, who had no part in her crimes, now live with the stigma of having a mother on death row. Both families are locked in an unending cycle of pain. Eventually, if Parker's appeals run out, the state will schedule her execution. Texas follows a strict timetable on those days. 6 a.m., final breakfast, the standard prison meal, not a special request. 8 a.m. Notification that last appeals have been denied. 10 a.m. Visitor processing begins. 12 noon. Deadline for clemency appeals to the governor. 2 p.m. Witness lists finalized. 4 p.m. Final phone calls allowed. 5:30 p.m. Transfer to the holding cell. 6 p.m. Execution procedure begins. In the hours before, Parker would be moved from the Mountain View Unit to the Huntsville Unit, where Texas carries out executions. Transport details are kept secret for security. Upon arrival, she'd be fingerprinted, strip-searched, and dressed in clean prison clothing, before being placed in a holding cell just steps away from the execution chamber. At that point, there is rarely any turning back. Before the execution, Parker would be allowed to meet with her attorneys and approved family members. These visits occur behind glass partitions, supervised by guards. Touch is not permitted. For many inmates, these moments are the hardest. They must say goodbye, knowing it will be the last time. Some families come for closure, while others cannot bear to witness the final hours. Parker would also be granted one last phone call, typically restricted to close relatives or her lawyer. The call is monitored and limited in time. Inmates on Texas death row may request a spiritual advisor during their final hours. In 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that condemned prisoners have the right to pray with their pastor and even be touched during execution. If Parker wishes, a minister could stand beside her in the chamber, praying aloud or laying a hand on her shoulder as the lethal drugs flow. By 5:30 p.m. on execution day, the witness list is finalized. Texas allows a limited number of individuals to attend. Victims' family members, who watch from one room, inmates' chosen witnesses, such as relatives, usually in another room, official media representatives, to ensure public transparency, state officials overseeing the procedure. Reporters are not allowed to record video or audio, but may take notes to release afterward. At 6 p.m., Parker would be led from her holding cell into the execution chamber. The room is painted pale green and contains only a gurney with leather straps, a microphone, and two large windows facing the witness areas. She would be secured to the gurney at her arms, legs, and chest. Needles are inserted into her veins, connected to tubes running behind the wall, where unseen technicians operate the machinery. The condemned is then given a chance to speak. This final statement is broadcast through a microphone so that witnesses and media can hear. Some inmates apologize, others proclaim innocence, and a few remain silent. If Parker chooses to speak, her words will be remembered as her final legacy. Texas uses a single drug protocol of pentobarbital, a powerful sedative. When the warden signals, the drug is released into the IV line. Within seconds, Parker would feel drowsy. Her speech would slur, and her body would relax as unconsciousness sets in. A prison doctor monitors her heartbeat. Usually within 10 to 20 minutes, the inmate is declared dead. The warden records the time of death, and the execution is complete. Once Parker is pronounced dead, her body would be removed and either released to her family or buried in the Captain Joe Byrd Cemetery, a graveyard maintained for executed inmates whose families do not claim them. For Reagan's family, the execution may bring a measure of closure, but experts note that grief rarely disappears with an inmate's death. The memories of loss remain, though the legal process finally ends. For Parker's family, the aftermath is equally heavy. They lose a daughter, a sister, and a mother, even though she committed a crime beyond comprehension. Cases like Parker's continue to fuel debate over the death penalty in America. Supporters argue that execution delivers justice and deterrence for the most brutal crimes. Opponents insist it is inhumane, prone to error, and prolongs suffering for all involved. In Parker's case, few question her guilt. She was caught with undeniable evidence. But the broader question remains: does taking her life serve justice, or does it simply extend the cycle of pain? Unlike many on death row, Parker is a woman. Female executions are rare in the US, and rarer still in Texas. Since 1854, only 6 women have been executed in the state, compared to hundreds of men. This rarity ensures that Parker's case will remain in public discussion for years. True crime media, legal scholars, and the public continue to dissect her actions and the punishment that followed. Even as the legal system works toward its conclusion, mysteries linger. What pushed Parker to sustain her lies for so long? Why did no one close to her intervene earlier? How did she justify her actions to herself in the final days before the murder? These questions may never be fully answered, but they haunt those who follow her story, shaping the way history will remember Taylor Parker. Taylor Parker's life on death row illustrates the complexity of America's harshest punishment. Behind the concrete walls and steel doors, she lives out her days in near total isolation, waiting for a legal system to decide her fate. The story is more than just her crime. It is about the family she destroyed, the children left behind, the community shaken, and the endless questions about whether execution is justice or vengeance. As her appeals wind their way through the courts, one truth remains certain. The memory of Reagan Simmons Hancock, her unborn daughter, and the cruelty of their loss will never fade.